The cost to buy outright teams, somewhere between $5 and $10 billion, doesn't make even more sense to them. And at the point when they then control the sport teams themselves.
Is that still something that you think is the cutting edge of AI, the cutting edge of everything we talk about? And then maybe look at AMD as well.
Right now, people everywhere are we use AI in our corporate business model now.
It's just because of where it is today versus 2022. And the analysts are like, wow, like getting more conviction behind the Netflix stock story. So
someone dies in a car accident once every 12 minutes in this country. We have proven as a species that we are shitty drivers.
Okay, the national Bloomberg channel in the U.S. And the sound is always down.
Should people have been asking more questions? Should they have been more suspicious of what was going on behind the scenes?
Would you have felt that management, someone up there, an eye in the sky, be like, let's not do that?
Most of the time, just start to feel like we're kind of wading into an area that doesn't feel.
Welcome to the Future's Edge. I am Jim Iuorio. That's Bob Iaccino. Today we have a special guest. And again, I've said it a million times, is that Bobby and I have been around legacy media for 25 years. You may know us. You may think some of our opinions are bullshit or that we're morons. But one thing you cannot deny is somehow we get absolutely top flight guests. And we have it again today. Jon Erlichman, he's been a former anchor at several different business outlets, has interviewed some of the most prominent names in finance over the years, and has his own opinions about portfolio construction, equities in general. Jon, thank you for coming. Before we get to you, though, I do want to thank couple people. First of all, you guys for making the show a success. All the DMs, all the retweets. We are so humbled and appreciative of it. Thank you to our sponsors, Independence Arc Farm. We always talk about how big conglomerate food companies are poisoning the food system, which they are. There is something we can do about it. Patronize small, independent, family-owned ranches like Independence Arc, and the meat is fabulous. Jon, how are you? Where are you coming to us from?
Jim, great to be with you. Coming from Toronto, where we're coming out of the deep freeze of winter. Unfortunately, the Maple Leafs are out of the playoffs, but that gives us a chance to realize that summer is short in Canada, and it's time to get outside while you're also watching the markets. It's great to be with you.
Are you a Canadian your whole life?
So I am a dual citizen. I grew up in Toronto, and when I made my journey to New York to cover the markets in a bigger way, ended up staying for a long time, stayed for a decade, long enough to have my two beautiful daughters. My oldest born in the great city of New York, my younger daughter born in the great state of California. And when we were thinking about coming back to Canada, we were just starting the citizenship process in the U.S. And it's funny. There's a lot of tension between Canada and the U.S. these days.
I hear that's the case.
But I'll tell you, I am a proud Canadian and American. So there you go.
Jon, I want to ask you, you've interviewed me a bunch of different times. And one of the things I always liked about being on with you is it wasn't like 60 seconds. It's like, well, we'll have to continue this conversation. It was always more like 9, 10, 11-minute interviews. Is that specific to individual channels, individual shows? How does that work? 'Cause that's one of the things that drove me crazy about legacy media. As you'd be on Jim and I used to talk about this all the time, and we used to always say that the people who are smart enough to understand what we're saying aren't listening to us. And by smart, I mean educated in this arena, right? We have viewers on the show that are smarter than both of us. And then the people who don't really understand what we're saying can't really get the full use of the information we're putting out there. So was that show specific? What was it?
Well, I think actually, speaking of differences between Canada and the US, I would say it's kind of a blanket statement, but media moves just a little slower up here, just in terms of, the length of a segment, the drama on air. It's just a little bit more subdued. So I think, if you were a guest on what is now called BNN Bloomberg in Canada, on average, there would be a little bit more time for the conversation. But, at the end of the day, I hear what you're saying. I still think it's even true, regardless of the country. One of the reasons, I wanted to launch into the next chapter of me in the same way that you guys are embracing what digital media affords you to do with a conversation is that something always felt a little bit restricted on all financial television, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it's also, sometimes it's not even just the fact that it's finance TV and people want to get things moving really quickly. it's just amazing to me. I was thinking about it the other day. My daughter said to me when I think I was watching some Maple Leafs hockey playoffs or something like that, and it was a commercial break, and I probably grumbled. She said, Dad, you hate commercials. And I thought, I do hate commercials. And we're spoiled in the streaming area, and these kids are growing up and they don't have to watch commercials. But the fact that that was the main business model means that you're always up against a break. A lot of times when guests are booked, poor Bobby has got to answer that question quickly.
Yeah.
Because we're literally up against the end of the hour. So I think just the nature of how traditional television works with advertising breaks, you're up against it. But I think you're right. I mean, I think the explosion of successful video and podcasts like what you're doing, it allows people who are really into this stuff to go deeper and get what they want, which isn't necessarily coming out in one soundbite.
Yeah, that's really what this show is about. And it used to drive me crazy when, again, I don't ever remember you doing it, but maybe that's because you're the one on the show right now. And if we talk to somebody else, we're talking to somebody from Yahoo in a couple of weeks, Alexandra Canal. And, she'll probably say it wasn't her, it was Erlichman.
There you go.
I remember, getting in my ear, things like, so is inflation dead? 4 seconds. Come on. I mean, I need more than 4 seconds to cover this.
Right. Who are you and what are you trying to prove? 2 seconds, please.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the transition? So I'm going to ask you a specific question. And Jimmy said you have your own opinions, but you still talk to a lot of big names, including people like me and Jimmy, who are big, huge, outrageously large names in this space.
The biggest names. People are saying, everybody's saying.
You're getting better at it.
It's a little better. It was still not good.
It's working on our Trump.
I saw it. I saw the hands.
Yeah. Okay, good.
In terms of things like you mentioned, we're spoiled with streaming, right? So Prime was one of the first people to do it. I believe Hulu did it as well. They raise their price, but then they say, we'll keep your prices the same, but you're going to have commercials. We enjoy a show that's on Amazon Prime called Reacher, with this big giant mountain of a man whose name I can't remember.
By the way, total side, he lives in my neighborhood in Toronto.
What's his name? I don't remember. It's
I don't, but I'll tell you, I'm not familiar with the show. I mean, I'm familiar with the show. I don't watch it, but this came up just over the weekend. They call him the Reacher. Here, like everybody knows him in the neighborhood as the Reacher, and because it's undeniable who he is. This guy is a monster. It's amazing. Like anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Alan Rickton or something like that. Alan Rickton. I mean, he's a giant, Jimmy. He's freaking massive.
Oh no, we watch it. Which, by the way, I will say something to you guys too. If you've never seen it, it's just a reboot of Kung Fu from the 70s. A nomadic person wanders the country and solves problems. It's Kung Fu. But anyway, I love it.
So we're watching that show now, and there's like 5 commercials because we would not pay the higher Prime streaming rate now. So now we pay a monthly rate and we have commercials. So what are people you talking to saying about that kind of a thing as a longer term plan?
Well, I think it's working just fine. Okay. I mean, well, first of all, I'll just say, like, anecdotally, as a viewer, at least what I see with most stream, I mean, we're talking Amazon here for a second, so I'll just say, like, I feel like at least with Amazon, and maybe someday if they're really hungry for cash, although I don't think they're doing too poorly right now, they'll bombard you with ads. But at least they're taking a more subtle approach, and they're thinking, how can we deliver the ads and then give people everything they want? And I just think it has forced such a change that is really hard to break when you still have the linear product that has those very specific ad breaks. And I think, in retrospect, for all the media companies, but I'm just going to single out Disney because, like, to do the kind of transition that they are working through right now, I mean, that is exceptionally difficult to be trying to have success with a streaming product simultaneously while you're still running these broadcast assets. I mean, it is tremendously difficult, not just because you got to be working on various technical factors and building the teams to make both things sing. But I also think it creates an environment where you got to make decisions on what your business is going to be about. So, like, in Detroit, and I felt like I saw this coming, and I feel like it's playing out the way I thought. I don't know what you guys think about it, but 2.5 to 4 years ago, all we heard was the EV transition and all the new models that those automakers are going to be focusing on to get the EV revolution. And the first thing I thought about was, man, those trucks are so profitable, such a lucrative business. How are you going to find the buy-in so that you don't have teams that are competing against each other and you're company just gets stuck. So jury's still out on that. And I think same is true in media, right? If you have a legacy business that isn't entirely dead, in fact, it's arguably more exciting when you've got all these big headlines in the news every day and an intense political environment right now. But the future is going to just be more tech, more streaming. How do you navigate that? How do you get everybody on side? So I think that in the end, it's the streamers' race to win. I think, that they're doing a great job with subtly introducing the ads, but it's not so subtle how much advertising revenue they're generating, and we just got through the big ad front season, and you got Netflix there that is flexing its muscle with this advertising strategy that they laid out. And by the way, let's just go back a couple of years ago when people were writing off Netflix. Probably was the best time to buy any stock over the last couple of years just because of where it is today versus 2022. But I was even watching some of the analysts' reaction to that event on their ad business the last few days. And the analysts are like, wow, like getting more conviction behind the Netflix stock story. So I just feel like it's their game to lose. And I was even thinking about this. I don't know if you guys have been thinking about this. I mean, I don't follow the world of sports ownership that closely, but I found myself wondering, if the teams are now going for growing multiples with each sale, and you've already seen a willingness on the part of the technology companies to put more than a toe in the water on sports rights. Amazon's in the business now. Apple's in the business. Netflix is in it. Like it's just a Christmas Day game and some, interesting stunt-driven live event, sporting events or wrestling matches or whatever. They're in it, right? They're in it. So at what point do those entities decide that the cost to buy outright teams somewhere between $5 and $10 billion doesn't make even more sense to them? And at the point when they then control the sports teams themselves, who has full control over the media ecosystem, which, outside of financial TV, which is obviously still got a leg to stand on, and cable news, everyone just says it's all about sports, right? Sports is the driving factor for traditional media. But if Amazon and Apple and Netflix, if they all decide that they want to pony up like $50 billion to buy a few sports teams, that could be the next interesting ripple to watch. I mean, it's a fascinating time. That's the big picture part, though. Then there's this sort of smaller part for the individual and the creator, and just the conversation that we're having right now, right? Like incredible disruption for everybody who works in the media business, but a super exciting time because we just have like endless opportunities for how we create the content. So that's the part that I'm genuinely excited about these days.
So that brings up some really interesting. And by the way, I'm in Chicago, and there has long been rumors for at least 2 years that Jeff Bezos' team, or potentially even Amazon, might take over the Bears, buy the Bears when Virginia dies, when she died a couple months ago. But there's three things. I don't know which way you want to go. First of all, with Reacher, does it ever bother you, Bobby, that he never does a damn push-up? Yes, yet he looks like a bodybuilder in every damn scene. So that bothers me, and he eats shit most times. But let's put that aside for now. Secondly, we went towards media, but you took it and went towards big technology companies, which I think is a fascinating discussion, particularly as it relates to collecting data, which I believe the real business ultimately is collecting data. Which brings me now to news media. Okay, so Bobby and I are both kind of outcast from legacy news media, and me for very specific reasons that I would not go along. What's that?
Certain ones.
I would not go along with what the projected narrative was supposed to be. They kept telling me what it was. I kept telling them to go fuck themselves. So the question becomes this, is that, do you think, and I'm not trying to be controversial, for you guys watching too, Bobby and John know each other. I don't know John. I don't know what his answer is going to be to this. So as a bad lawyer, do you think that has been poisoned, news media, by the top-heavy nature of the sponsorships that have developed since the 90s, let's call it, when it was made legal for pharma to advertise directly to people? Do you look at news media and say to themselves, those guys are full of shit, or do you still think there's a lot of admirable straight shooters in the game?
So it's a pretty big question, Jim. And I will say that, like, I've worn a bunch of different hats over my career. And while most people probably are familiar with the work I've done on business TV, I've done straight news too. And I've spent some time before I started my own venture, Ticker Take, last fall. I was working for a major media organization here in Canada, and oftentimes I'd be anchoring the national news. And the truth is, individuals are, this is just my opinion, you asked for my opinion, individuals are just doing their job. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
like to be able to get to the point where you actually have a say, whether you're the person who's lucky enough to say the things or write the things or produce the thing that goes on television, they generally don't give you the keys to that car in your first year on the job. You have to put in a lot of years, right? So people are putting in long careers, decade long careers, and you're trying to do the right thing. And if you go into news too, you're generally going in with a compass towards telling the truth. I mean, like that's what I wanted to do. And so day to day, you're just wanting to do the storytelling that you think should be done. I think what became very clear to me over time is that even if that is your perspective, there's just all these other forces around you that will influence what you do. You know, we've used the word bias so much the last few years that I just started thinking, well, at the end of the day, literally every person has bias because every person has a different vantage point because it's their own life, you know? Might be just on the margins, but so I think at the end of the day, in light of all that, I think that people are trying to do their jobs as individuals, but collectively, there's other stuff that just influences what ends up coming on screen. Look, everybody's hoping for the best for former President Biden, but like there's been a news cycle for the last few days about what was happening behind the scenes and who was, reporting or not reporting on his situation. I think it's that alone is a reminder. Should people have been asking more questions? Should they have been more suspicious of what was going on behind the scenes? It's just it's a train and it chugs along, and I guess there's sort of different ways that it can be pushed in one direction or the other direction. And I think at the end of the day, now we're entering a world which, I don't know if it's more complicated or less complicated, but we're all going to be spending more times in these very tailored silos, and we'll see how it all plays out.
So before I get off this news subject, part of the reason I wanted to have you on here is one of the things I used to tell people about you. I have family in Toronto, fairly large family on my father's side. And they would see me when I would come on BNN and then subsequently BNN Bloomberg with you. And one of the things I always said about you when they would ask me what you were like is I have no idea what Jon's politics are. And that to me, that's the best compliment I could possibly give an interviewer, a newscaster, a broadcaster, whatever you want to call yourself in your past role. No clue what your politics were. Still don't care, to be honest, because you would just say, here's my question. My answer would come out and you would never say, but don't you think this? That's what drives me crazy. So I look at there's
Andrew Ross Sorkin.
Right? Yeah, Sorkin was one. Oh, I can't stand that guy. So when you would come on, you would just ask me the question and you would say, that was Bob Iaccino and he thinks this. And you'd move on to the next thing. It wasn't about the broadcaster. Now, I've slowly come to terms with the idea that some shows are designed to be that way. And CNN has a lot of those shows. They're starting to get a little bit more where they have some of the other side put in there. I think you're starting to get where my politics are. But things would be, I'm curious from the perspective of the broadcaster. I have Bloomberg on in the corner, have it on now. Okay, the national Bloomberg channel in the US. And the sound is always down. I'm just glancing out there. See the NASDAQ is up 2 basis points. Russell, I see Wynn Sporting Goods acquisition of Foot Locker, whatever. I'm just looking for headlines that matter to me. I don't listen to any of the interviews anymore. Pretty sure very few people listen to mine. But the amount of, I saw a headline up there the other day that said, a disastrous 100 days by President Trump is affecting the markets. Disastrous is an opinion. I don't care how you slice it. It's an opinion. So now what? Do I have to look at this whole channel as a news show? Is that what you mean from the perspective of a broadcaster like you, where you say, that's up there, I can't do anything about it, I'm on this channel?
Yeah, it is true that every channel is like driving a different car or being on a different boat. Like that's just the reality, And I think over the last 15 years, things have gotten so extreme that, you can feel like you're on very different vehicles depending on what the network is. I will tell you that the one thing I decided, I don't know when I actively concluded this, but at a certain point, I just felt like the audience wants good information. Some people might want exciting headlines. Some people might want drama, but I just felt like when I'm doing an interview, once we're locked into having Bobby as our guest, and I'm looking at the cards that are in front of me, and I'm trying to think, what is it that the person who's listening to this can get out of this? The best thing I can do is to ask questions that hopefully bring about answers that would satisfy what the audience member wants, and try to keep an ear to the conversation so that I can make sure that I stay on that path, as opposed to having my own agenda and sort of using the same playbook to get you to say this or that. I just find that more interesting. It's not like I go to, I don't know, a cocktail party and start talking to somebody with some agenda to get us to sort of one kind of conversation. I'm going to talk to this person. They might say something interesting. What unlocks more interesting information is to maybe ask another interesting question. So that was always kind of important to me. And I don't really wade too deeply into what my politics would be, because I just don't know who that serves, And that might sound weird to say in an environment where you have such a divide in the way people live their political lives right now and where they go to get the messages that they want to hear. But I really think that listening is one of the best skills that you can hone, and good things come from it. Now, the other thing, I guess, just to go sort of deeper into the media machine, like, I did try to spend time talking to the audience members about what it is they actually want. Right. So as an example, a lot of times in our industry over the years, there would be a lot of competition amongst producers and shows and anchors for like some marquee guest. Sometimes it was different outlets competing with each other. Sometimes it's the same outlet that's fighting to get some, quote, big name. And there's very rarely conversations in advance around what you're trying to serve with doing that. Like, I guess it's supposed to be obvious, but I only bring it up because, like, I would ask audience members, like, what do you think about having like a CEO interview for like 6 or 7 minutes? They're like, well, if I'm not interested in that particular story, that's 6 or 7 minutes that I can't get back. Right. So I'd spend a lot of time just trying to be like, well, what are the habits of someone who's tuning in? Like, what do they want? And the reality is, especially at this point in the life cycle of, let's say, financial TV, I think the way you just described your Bloomberg experience, I'm hoping is similar to the experience for a lot of people right now, right? It's harder to get younger people to become addicts to linear television. So you're trying to feed an audience that is used to the rhythms of what they see, might be up on a screen in the corner. It might be their main television while they're having their morning coffee. They're probably coming to you just because they want to be in the know on what's going on. So I never want to get too far away from that in any given moment. And then if we're going to go off onto some like side tangent because of some interesting or fun interview, I mean, sure, it's nice if it feeds my own desires and needs or my own interests and curiosity, but I still want to make sure that it gets back to what somebody wants, and I've taken that same philosophy to what I've been building with my venture Ticker Take, which is, and I learned this over, a lot of years, there are people that don't really care as much about the dance. They might have on the margins interest on what's happening with the economy. They might have on the margin interests with policy and stuff like that, but they're just looking for some general ideas on investing. And, Bobby, like one of the nice things that you always bring to interviews was you can do that context, but you can also provide the investment context. You can layer it right in, right? If people are coming to these channels for practical ideas, that was really important. And I found in digital audiences, because I've been using TikTok for 5 years and kind of finding rhythms with what people want. They want that. Unfortunately, the bandwidth is, shorter, right? Like people are going through stuff much, much speedier. So you're trying to find a way to give them a version of that in a much more simplified and faster version. And I got to tell you guys, like, I love that. Like, I think we should all be excited by the fact that these are different forms of communication. And because we have a million different platforms today, and we don't even know what the platforms are going to look like in 2 or 3 years from now, like, we're creating languages here. Like, these are ways we're communicating that we never had the tools to build off of in the past. That's really exciting to me. I just love learning the language of how you get information from you to the person who's actually consuming it.
I love that answer. That's fantastic, by the way. But I will, and by the way, this is not supposed to be any sort of gotcha too, because if anything's going to be a gotcha on me, no. So for like, let's say for the first 10 years of my contract employment with the TMZ of financial stations, like, and I know what I would do if I was preparing a scathing example of something a stock had done or a company had done, and it was a huge sponsor, and it would be explicit or more likely implicit, like, yeah, let's not go with that story. Have you in your career, let's say Bob's House of Pharmaceuticals, or let's make it Tim Hortons, let's be Canadian. They were 70% of your sponsorship budget, and you had a guest on who sent you his notes saying that Tim Hortons is guilty of this and this and this and forensic, and we're taking them down, and this is why I'm short the stock. Would you have ever felt, I'm not saying how you would have bent or blown, would you have felt that management, someone up there, an eye in the sky, be like, let's not do that?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
right. Okay,
Yeah,
good.
most of the time it's like this thing that you just start to feel like we're kind of wading into an area that doesn't feel.
I've felt it. Right. I know exactly what you mean. And I went with it for 10, 15 years. Like, okay, you guys don't want to talk about it. But then finally I was like, you know what? I'm going to talk about what I want to talk about. And that led to my dismissal, which, by the way, was fantastic.
But, we're all getting into like some of the places where I think we took wrong turns with a lot of like what we're trying to achieve, because that whole idea of, hot take here and hot take there, like, I just feel like, again, like, I have a lot of interests. I just so happen to go deep into news for like a good chunk of my career, but to do it correctly it's a real pain in the ass. Like, it is, it means that you can't say something off the cuff because you haven't had a chance to verify if what you're about to say is accurate. And one of the reasons I loved the blanket of news was if I felt good about my reporting, if I had talked to direct sources, and Bloomberg was always it was a great breeding ground, quite frankly, for even just the idea of making sure that you have, multiple direct sources that are tied to a story. Then you can feel more confident in what you are presenting, right? You feel good about the news being brought to people's attention. That news might not make the bosses happy, but it's accurate based on hard work that you've done. That was always a very rewarding experience for me personally. And it kind of took the pressure off, asking or feeling like you have to ask something because of some bigger pressure, or not asking something because of that pressure. Because to your point, like that doesn't feel good. But doing something that is real does feel good.
So at the end of March, Jon, you did a video and you asked me to submit a stock pick. Jimmy's can't talk about this stuff. Let me rephrase that. Jimmy has the ability to talk about this stuff, but in his current licensing situation, he's not allowed to. So
talk about futures and macro.
Yeah,
right.
He's a futures guy. He's an everything guy. Down the road, he's going to talk about this stuff. I'm going to make that prediction. But I sent you a video and I saw the final product. I appreciated you send me that. And I put it up on X a week or two after you sent it to me. And it was just a bunch of stock picks from a bunch of people. I believe mine was Palantir, up almost 39% since I called it.
Who's counting? Who's counting? Yeah.
Who's counting? Not important that I was that great at that. Actually, it fell like almost days after you put that out. Palantir dropped about 8 or 9%, and then it shot up from there. But as usual, I'm good at what? I'm not good at when. Were there any ones that stuck with you? Besides mine, of course, of those picks that stuck with you that you see still have like kind of a ways to run. Remember, for anybody watching this, Jon, before you give where people can find you doing this kind of work again. And then also tell me if there was anything in there that stuck besides mine, because people don't want to hear my opinion. They hear it every week.
Well, people can find most of what I do on social media under my name, Jon Erlichman. That's where you can find me on Instagram and TikTok and X. And our YouTube channel is called Ticker Take with Jon Erlichman. But if you just search Jon Erlichman, you'll find me there. And we're pretty new, but we're finding our groove pretty quickly. Actually, we had more than 1 billion views on our content in our first 6 months. That was really encouraging across different social media platforms.
Yeah.
But the concept of Ticker Take is built around the idea of getting a lot of takes from great people I have trust in, who I've been able to interact with over the years, like you. And I think that I'm like, the overwhelming message that I'm left with on some of the stock ideas is that I just don't think that tech can be broken. Like that's kind of my view. And I think we saw that in the last like few weeks with the roaring recovery there. I think that Warren Buffett and his transition has kind of opened the door towards the long game, the value of compounding. And I think there's like tremendous opportunity for anyone who is leaning heavily on businesses that reward shareholders. We're working on a video right now that has, a whole range of companies from like the auto parts players like AutoZone and O'Reilly, which have just been these like kings of performance for so long because of this stable business and this religion around buying back stock. And like, that's fascinating to me. But, at the end of the day, I think that the growth that most of these other companies can offer, the Palantirs of the world, what I just don't understand, Bobby, is if everybody is right about this AI transition, and I understand that on the margins, every industry can incorporate AI. But if we're going to see the kind of disruption that people are suggesting we will see, and there's like a handful of companies that really understand this stuff, and then there's sort of bureaucratic other businesses that are sort of, putting an AI team on the case. I don't know, because everybody was like, tech is overvalued, tech's gone too far. And I do like to do videos that look at the long term, try to sort of get a sense on if we're going to try to look out 5 years, 10 years, what are people going to like? Boy, that tech trade, I think still looks very enticing to a lot of people. I'm working on a video that we're going to have out soon, later this month. I looked back at 30 years of historical data, and I just looked at, call it the top 25 or so stock performers. And, when you stretch it out by 30 years and you include some companies that have had the best performance over those 30 years, they're not quite 30 years public, but they make it onto the list. I mean, you've got a bunch of stocks that have rallied more than 10,000% over that period of time. And it really feels to me like it's a couple of buckets. It's these companies that have these, for whatever reason, dominant market share, reliable business, arguably recurring revenue, and then kind of a religion around returning capital to investors and just staying hardcore disciplined to that. Or they are technology companies, right? Like even just looking back at the last 30 years on your top 25 or so, Amazon's going to be on there, Apple's going to be on there. And then the new generation starts to make its way on. Tesla's now been public for 15 years. And like,
Wow.
I love the Tesla story. It's amazing because, it could be that everything we're hearing about just doesn't happen. But if the concept of having the AI advantage allows an electric vehicle company to fully transition into having a robo-taxi business and a humanoid robot business, and the movies that we've seen that allow for those new industries to flourish, I mean, that's so exciting to talk about. I know, the Warren Buffett faithful like the excitement of slow and steady wins the race. I love that. I want people to be successful as investors, but I'm so excited about the fact that you have a few companies out there that are willing to give you a 10-year roadmap on where we could go. And we'll see who's right. We'll see who's right about that, and which technology ultimately wins the day, and what of that technology influences businesses. That's my 2 cents on some of the other investment ideas that seem to be floating around in a lot of the videos we're doing.
So when you looked at like O'Reilly Auto Parts, things like that, do you look for what's the possible huge disruptor? When I think about auto parts, and then we mentioned fully autonomous, self-driving, which would, in my mind, a possible second derivative of that would be need for many less cars, right? If a family of four has 4 drivers, but the one car could bounce back and forth and pick them all up, that could disrupt that, right? So then it brings you back to the technology. And then, because you said technology several times and then the newcomers, but you never mentioned NVIDIA. And Bobby, I want your take on this too. Is that still something that you think is the cutting edge of AI, the cutting edge of everything we talk about? And then maybe look at AMD as well. What do you think of those names?
Well, I mean, with NVIDIA, because I was just looking at some of the Bloomberg numbers today, like on what the 5-year expectations are for a couple of key metrics like revenue and free cash flow. And if memory serves, if you average it out, obviously everybody takes analyst estimates with a grain of salt, but I like the fact that when you have some companies that have a real beehive of activity around them, there's enough people that are forecasting beyond 1 year. Like, that's exciting to me in a world that, where everybody's worried about today's earnings day. And I just feel like for some investors, earnings day coverage on financial television does not serve you well as a long-term investor. So getting back to it, in the case of NVIDIA, I think the estimates right now on average are about 185% revenue growth over the next 5 years, and free cash flow growth of around 225%. And you're talking about a stock which I think rallied more than 25,000% over the last 10 years, right? And people cannot get that out of their mind. But one of the things that I was looking to tackle with this video was, if you can't get another 25,000% return over a 10-year period, what return can you expect if here's a company that's, in a position where it can generate the kind of revenue growth that, most companies would only dream of, and is already sort of, in the pole position on the business side? Honestly, guys, I don't know the answers. As a journalist, I spent too many years just trying to surf the wave in the middle and ask Bobby for the actual answer to that question. But I think I already told you what my opinion is. I think
it's not going anywhere.
The long game is scary if you do not have somebody with technology at their fingertips as your CEO. That's
right.
That's
can it go down 25% in a huge correction? Of course it can. But like you've said before, and you've said multiple times, it's all over your Twitter feed. It's the long game that makes people money. Bobby, you have any thoughts on that?
A couple things. Our friend Mike Singleton from Invictus Research did a little study recently and said that basically the overvalued EPS model, right? They're priced at 2,000 times next year's 12-month forward earnings, or what everybody wants to use, has virtually no correlation to the future stock price in a 3 to 5 year time window. So it's interesting to kind of take that off the table for me, because for a long time I looked at something and I said, look, I'll trade this, but I can't do a medium-term swing trade on this because I don't know when those forward-looking EPS, when it's going to come back down to earth. It seems to me that a lot more of them over the last, let's call it 2 decades, achieved that through profits as opposed through a lower in price, right? Their P has moved quicker and their E has moved, and that's what's gotten them back in line. And some of them have remained out of whack versus history for 2 decades. Right? Tesla's one of them. I had no idea they were public that long, by the way. For some reason, I still think I remember Tesla's IPO, and I guess I do. And the second thing is this, from a perspective, and John, this is actually for you, Tony Nash nerd on X. If you ever want to talk to somebody that just knows everything about AI forward and backward, he's a friend of ours, Tony Nash. Great, great, great guy. Again, he's Tony Nash nerd on X. If you want to reach out to him and mention my name or Jim's, he knows both of us really well. He has always said, and I put this question to him, and then I'll tell you how he answered it. What I don't know about AI right now is similar to what I remember during the dot-com bubble. Companies started putting .com in their name, and their stock would rally. Right now, people everywhere are putting, we use AI in our corporate business model now. I don't know who's actually using it and who's not. But what I do know is NVIDIA is really, really far ahead of the other chip makers. AMD, their chart, if you put their chart up against NVIDIA, if NVIDIA rallies for a month, AMD starts to follow. They're just not really caught up. So it's the kind of thing where if you think it's a sustainable NVIDIA rally that you've missed, you could probably buy AMD. I'm not a fan of that kind of trading. So real quick on the self-driving thing, I've been kind of kidding around that because I still like bourbon, I can't wait for self-driving, right, to be a thing. And I test drove a Tesla the other day, and I'm a V8 guy. I don't like electric cars. I like the sound of an engine. The salesman was like, "Do you want to try a full FSD?" And he said, "Do you want to try FSD?" I'm like, "What's that?" "Full self-driving." I'm like, "Yeah, sure." This was in Naples, Florida. The guy hits the thing and he goes, "Tesla, take me to Venetian Village." He goes, "Okay, push that button when you're ready." I pushed the button, took my foot off the brake, and I could have read a newspaper. It was unbelievable. It was absolutely unbelievable. And I know Tesla's ahead of the rest. Not sure if this drives the stock price or not. I'm just saying I couldn't be more bought into full self-driving from just that one experience.
Can I add
It was
something to what Bobby said
absolutely
too?
unbelievable. Yeah.
Because guys like Bobby and I are against the man. We're against people controlling our driving. So for us to be, and because someone dies in a car accident once every 12 minutes in this country, we have proven as a species that we are shitty drivers. So I am for this coming in now, despite the fact that it goes against every one of my principles. Sorry, I didn't mean to interject that. Yes.
No, it's okay. I was with a friend the other day and I was telling him about this and he goes, I don't know. I don't trust those things. I go,
who do you trust?
Here's
the guy who came through the red light and hit my wife last summer, remember? And absolutely flattened the cars like a pancake. So yeah, I don't trust that guy either. It was on his phone. But anyway.
My theory is this, John. You tell me what you think. There'll be fewer accidents, but a higher percentage of them will be fatal. That's what I think is going to happen with FSD when all the cars are full self-driving. Because for that to fail, it's going to be a catastrophic failure. As opposed to I only had 4 espressos instead of 6. And I kind of dozed behind the wheel for 5 minutes and sideswiped a guy. You know, I don't know. Does that sound nuts to you?
No, I mean, but these are the conversations we have to have. Like if the technology is there and certain businesses are ready for the rollout, I mean, how do we ensure that the regulators, the government is there in lockstep? Because I think that's a big consideration. Plus, like every country is different on that kind of stuff. I still think it'll probably take more time than people might think, just because of arguably the red tape around making a transition. But, you know, I mean, Jim, you're talking about some of the things I post on X. What in the auto category, one of my favorites is you can still find online from time to time these amazing advertisements from like well over 100 years ago, where it would be like a carriage maker trying to encourage people not to buy a car and stick with the horse. And, you know, like, so yeah, like we're going there. I just don't know the speed at which we go. But, you know, Tesla, you know, the other thing is like, you know, you guys are talking about how opinion influences or how you sort of navigate opinion. I mean, we have this handful of stocks out there that are sort of constantly wrapped up in drama, and Tesla is probably at the top of the list. I mean, you know, they eat up so much market attention in a world with thousands and thousands of different stocks that it only makes sense that you have all these side stories that factor into Tesla's stock. All that said, I was just looking at the estimates for Tesla performance over the next 5 years, and it's coming off that lower base. And, you know, they're expected to see, I believe, a more than doubling in their revenue and a more than 4-fold increase in their free cash flow. Like so I guess what I'm saying is, if the Wall Street story doesn't change and it's still based on short-term performance, and you've got, you know, this category of companies that, because of the speed of their growth, will allow them to, whatever you want to say, beat the expectations more quarters than not. I think it's worth talking about that. I think it's worth trying to sort of use that as a guide as you're thinking about the investing landscape over the next few years.
I'm going to just say something real quick before I turn it back to Jimmy, is that always happy to help you with your videos. The thing I said about you is real. I had no idea what your politics were. And I think probably an even bigger compliment, John, is I didn't care. That was a very, very big compliment coming from me. And I will tell you, if you're ever doing one of your ticker take things and you need an interest rate or a Fed guy, he's on the screen right now. Also, any commodities, gold, metals, things like that. Jimmy's your guy for interest rate, and it's specifically interest rate and Fed stuff. So
appreciate that. We should wrap it up. Our producer's got to go. He is Jon Erlichman. Find him on Twitter. Find him. He puts out fantastic videos. They're entertaining and informative all at the same time. 2 quick things to add about automotive. Henry Ford said himself, if I asked the people what they want, they would have said faster horses. Love that quote. Secondly, about the quality of driving of us as a species, and this is a true story, which we'll both go look up. In the year was in the 1920s. There was 2 cars in the state of Ohio, 2 and 2 only. Those 2 cars got in an accident with each other. So at one point in time, the entirety, 100% of the automobiles that existed in the state of Ohio were in the same accident. So we are not good drivers. Anyway, we talked about a lot of names out here. If you want more in-depth analysis of the names we do, Bobby and I and our technical strategist, Mike Arnold, do the newsletter, The Unfiltered Investor. Right now it's on the Slice app. And what else is it on, Bobby?
It's about to be announced on a much bigger platform than that. So
about to be announced on a much bigger platform.
Now.
I'm always as surprised as you guys are when these announcements come out because I don't do shit for any of this stuff. Bobby does, and I appreciate that very much. So follow us, The Unfiltered Investor. This is the Futures Edge. Thank you guys so much. Thanks to our sponsor, Independence Arc. I'm Jim Iuorio. That's Bob Iaccino. And of course, that is Jon Erlichman.